Welcome back. All right, so according to the live stream we had yesterday, the number one thing that I was getting asked about was whether or not I play fantasy. No, but. So this is an ultimate pool guide from 20 years ago. Much, much more information in this back then than what you get now when you get the hockey news. In fact, it's got points per game. It goes through every single player in every professional league, basically globally. So yeah, these used to be really filled with information. You had your last 3 years. You had a note on what they expected and what the hockey news produces now. Well, let's just say this was $6.95. Now they're about $10. I like the value I got at $6.95, and this was always my start for the following season. So I'd look through all the fantasy stuff, and I'd look to like here, Brian Ralston, 60 points was the projection. He had 59 the year before. Rolston's one of the best third liners in the game. He collects points on the power play, and with his team a man down over the last two seasons, he has scored 14 shorthanded markers. Almost saw a point in there. There isn't, but hey, I almost. So 14 shorthanded goals in 2 seasons. So there was always a lot of information in these. I really got a kick out of them, and I always like looking and guessing. Here's what I think somebody's going to get next year. And so I never really got into the gambling side or any of that. I belong to a couple of different fantasy leagues, but nothing major. But these, I really miss these. So now that the hockey news and their current fantasy guide, and it's just labeled fantasy guide, this is what you get. So it just tells you the points that they're predicting for the player. They've got one small column here for the points the year before, the cap hit, and then just a little blurb on each player. They don't give you the kind of information they used to, which is likely because everything's online, right? So everything's all digital anyway. So over the coming month, I'm going to take a look at some fantasy-related stuff, but I just want to look at the top 20, and this is where really it comes down to opinion, and players can finish in various places on this, and if you're in a fantasy league, a player having a season where they're maybe 5-10 points above normal, that could be the difference between winning or losing, right? So ESPN, the Hockey News Yearbook I just showed you, and NHL.com. And the reason I had to specify yearbook is because if you go to the Hockey News site, there are other rankings as well where they've ranked all the players. So, yeah, and they're completely different. I looked at that. I was doing, the Google search for these, and I thought, well, the Hockey News one should be the same. Nope, not even close. So that's how quickly things can change. During the off season, they've completely changed their rankings. So, well, it's a different person writing them. But again, that's the thing. It's all speculation and opinion. I try to take that out when I do previews and look at who's, projecting in which direction, but it can be tough. All right, so ESPN's top 20, Hockey News, and the NHL top 20, all three of them agree Connor McDavid's number one, and McDavid led the scorers last year with 153 points. All three agree Leon Draisaitl's number two, and Leon Draisaitl was number two in the NHL with 128 points, 15 points clear of third place. So that's where the agreement ends. You've got McKinnon third on the Hockey News, McKinnon third on the NHL.com. McKinnon is seventh on the ESPN list. They've got Pettersson of the Canucks third, so hey, ESPN's very gung-ho on Pettersson. Then you get to number 4. Pasternak's number 4 on the ESPN and NHL list. Pasternak was number 3 on the NHL scoring list with 61 goals and 113 points. They've got Kucherov number 4 on the Hockey News. Kucherov was 4th in scoring, 82 games, 30 goals, 83 assists, 113 points. Kucherov, not here. So this is where it's interesting to me. ESPN does not have Kucherov projected in the top 20 scorers. Oh, I think he's going to be in the top 20 scorers. On the NHL one, they have him at 6th. Then you get to 5th here. Austin Matthews, number 5 on ESPN. Matthew Tkachuk, number 5 on both the Hockey News and the NHL site. Matthew Tkachuk's number 6 on ESPN. Matthew Tkachuk's an elite forward now in the NHL. From a scoring perspective, he's absolutely fantastic. Matthews at 5 is a bold move because Matthews wasn't top 20 in scoring this past season, whereas Matthew Tkachuk was number 7. He had 109 points in 79 games. So, yeah, there's a good chance that Tkachuk ends up being worthy of that 5-6 spot here because he was number 7 in the overall scoring. Number 6, So Kachuk's here. Jack Hughes shows up for the first time on the Hockey News site or Hockey News yearbook at 6th. Kucherov's number 6 on the NHL list. And so for Jack Hughes, he's down at 12th, but he had 99 points in 78 games, and he's trending in the upwards direction. So I would be very surprised if Jack Hughes doesn't hit 100 points and 50 goals this year. 7th, the Hockey News has Pasternak there. Jason Robertson's number 7 on the NHL list, and McKinnon, of course, number 7 on ESPN. So it really is all over the place. Number 8, Robertson shows up there on the ESPN list. Mitch Marner is number 8 on the Hockey News list. Marner shows up at 17 on the NHL list. Marner is not top 20 on ESPN. So this is where I'm interested to see how this all works, because they've got Austin Matthews at number 5, so clearly they believe he's going to have a really good year. They don't have Marner in the top 20. They have Erik Karlsson projected ahead of Marner. And I don't really see it that way personally, but again, we shall see, right? Then at number 9, you've got Rantanen, number 9 on ESPN's list, also number 9 on the Hockey News. He's number 8 on the NHL list, so they're all happy with where he is. He was number 8 in the overall scoring with 105 points this past season. Robertson, on the other hand, had 109. I think Robertson can eclipse that and go higher. We shall see. It really depends on whether or not scoring continues to go up in the NHL. We've seen it trending in that direction. Is it ready to drop? Now, Sorokin's number 10 on the ESPN list. Sorokin doesn't show up on the Hockey News list, which is interesting because with goaltenders, it depends. So if you're playing fantasy, sometimes it'll just be wins. Sometimes it's various goaltending stats. So really, Sorokin, if you're looking at save percentage, if you're looking at goals against and just really strong stats, Sorokin might be a really good pick at that spot. But if you're looking for wins, the Islanders going to get the most wins? Odds are probably not. So if you're looking for wins, you might need to look in another direction if that's the one criteria, right? Which I don't think is a great measure for goaltenders. But to me, if I'm picking by wins, I'd go with the number 19 pick here. They have Georgiev, because I think Colorado's going to win a lot of games. Now, 10 on the Hockey News list is Kaprizov. Kaprizov was in the overall scoring list, not top 20 this past year. He's going to have a bounce back. He has to. And they have Matthews at number 10 on the NHL list. Number 11, Tage Thompson, shows up on the ESPN list there. Tage Thompson was 15th in scoring with 94 points, so he could improve. Pettersson shows up at 11th on the Hockey News list, and there's Kaprizov at 11th on the NHL list. Kaprizov's number 12 on the ESPN list. So everybody believes that Kaprizov had a down year. I agree. I think Kaprizov's going to have a bounce back. Braden Point shows up at number 12 on the Hockey News list, and that's the only list he's on. He was number 14 in scoring this past season, 95 points in 82 games. Sidney Crosby, number 12 on the NHL's list. He was number 16 in scoring with 93 points in 82 games. But what's interesting is Crosby doesn't show up on the other two lists. So believing, I guess, that he's going to fall back a little bit more in scoring. He is getting older. That does happen. But I don't bet against the Penguins and Crosby. I just don't. Number 13 on the ESPN list is Jack Hughes. Robertson shows up at 13th on the Hockey News list. Brady Tkachuk shows up at 13th on the NHL list. Shows up at 14th on the ESPN list. Brady Tkachuk not qualifying as a top 20 scorer in the NHL this year. Stützle, number 14 on the Hockey News list. Stützle's number 16 on the ESPN list. He does not show up in the top 20 on the NHL list, where at 14, they have Tage Thompson. Stützle, of course, was 19th in scoring with 90 points in 78 games. At 15th, ESPN has Ottinger. I don't mind Ottinger at that spot, again, if you're going by wins. If you're going by save percentage, he had a .919 this past season, which is very good, but it's not top 2 or top 3 in the NHL. Matthews is 15th on the Hockey News list, and Ovechkin shows up at 15th on the NHL list. So the NHL list has to be weighing it more towards goals, because I feel like the days of Ovechkin being an elite points producer probably behind him. But 45, 50 goals, yeah, that's absolutely something he can hit again. Number 16 on the ESPN list is Stützle. 16 is Clayton Keller on the THN list, which is the Hockey News. And Cale Makar shows up at 16th on the NHL list. If Makar stays healthy, 90 points is absolutely within reach for him. Keller's an interesting one. He doesn't show up in the top 20, but he barely missed. 87 points being the shutoff point here. And, of course, right below that cutoff is Keller's 86 points. So Keller's not a reach at 16. At 17 on ESPN, you have Makar, you have Stamkos on the Hockey News list, you have Marner on the NHL list. So Marner lower down than Matthews. And again, I find that interesting. If it's from a goals perspective, absolutely Matthews is going to be the guy. But if it's from a points perspective, I'm going with Marner. So it really depends on what you're looking at. Yossi 18th on the list for ESPN. Yossi doesn't show up on the other lists. Yossi was not a top 20 points producer. Marner had 99 points in 80 games. Yossi could have a bounce back season, sure. I don't know if I see him in the 90-point range, especially with Nashville's offense being whittled away a little bit over last season and during the offseason as well. Nugent Hopkins shows up at 18th on the Hockey News list. He's not top 20 in the others. Nugent Hopkins was 9th overall in scoring in the NHL with 104 points. So it's possible that you may be able to get him in your fantasy a little bit later than you thought, because people will look at that number and go, hey, he's not going to hit that again, and take other players instead. So if you believe that Nugent Hopkins' numbers were sustainable into this season, you might have yourself a bargain there. Shesterkin shows up at 18th on the NHL list. I'm kind of surprised that they only have the two goaltenders and that they don't show up till 18th and 19th. But again, by what criteria? Criteria could be different. 19th on the ESPN list is Georgiev. Zibanejad shows up 19th on the Hockey News list. He was 18th in scoring with 91 points in 82 games. Doesn't show up on the other lists. Sorokin is 19th on the NHL list. So Sorokin, 10th on ESPN, 19th on the NHL, and from the Hockey News yearbook, he doesn't end up top 3. He ends up 4th. So 20th on the list, Erik Karlsson for ESPN. He's not top 20 in the other two lists. Karlsson was 11th in scoring with 101 points in 80 games this past season. Panarin's number 20 on the NHL list. He was 17th in scoring with 92 points in 82 games. And there's Pettersson, number 20 on the NHL list. So this is one of the ultimate, just huge difference here. ESPN has Pettersson at 3rd, 11th on the Hockey News list, and 20th on the NHL list. So it really is kind of all over the place. And when I was putting together my videos on best forwards, defensemen, goaltenders, I did look at other lists and I did look at other rankings. And I was like, these are really all over the place. So I didn't feel as bad if my rankings were completely different than someone else's. Now, the Hockey News, in their fantasy, they list goaltenders separate. The top 3 goaltenders, Shesterkin, Vasilevsky, and Ottinger. Vasilevsky not showing up on these sides tells me that they believe that Tampa Bay is not going to be one of the top teams in the NHL. And while I agree, he's probably going to play a bunch. He's probably going to get about the same number of wins he had last year. So when we look at last year's standings, when we look at the scoring, I think almost everybody shows up in here except William Nylander, who had 87 points in 80 games. He doesn't show up top 20 on any of the lists. When you look at goaltenders, Ullmark does not show up here either. So everybody of the mind, and I agree, Ullmark had a career year. I don't think he's going to repeat it. Georgiev was also tied in lead with wins with 40. Hellebuck, Ottinger, Shesterkin, all 37 wins. Hellebuck, of course, is a tough one. You could put him on your team right now, and then he might get traded, which might make his value great, might make his value tank, right? We have no idea. And then when you look at save percentage, Ullmark 938 there, Gustafsson with a 931. If you believe that Gustafsson's going to play a lion's share of the games for Minnesota, he could be a very good pick. Sorokin at 924, Swayman at 920. So it's possible Swayman gets more starts this year. Maybe it's a 40-40 split. Hellebuck 920 as well. So the numbers for Hellebuck are very strong all over. And in terms of save percentage, Ottinger at a 919. So he doesn't quite qualify for the top 5. Now, when you look at points per game from last season, Barkov's an interesting one. He doesn't show up as top 20 in any of them, but he was 18th in points per game at 1.15. So Barkov, if he's able to stay healthy for a full season, absolutely could be a nice pickup in the top 20, where maybe he's overlooked. You might be able to pick him up outside the top 20 too. Alex Tuch was 24th in points per game with 1.07. I don't think Tuch keeps that up, but if you believe he can, he could be a good value pick over some of the guys that may be overrated on the board. Buchnevich, 1.06 points per game. He was 25th. Buchnevich could be a solid pickup. Zach Hyman, if you believe that Hyman's numbers can stay in the elite category, along with, say, a Nugent Hopkins. 1.05 points per game this past season for 27th. 29th, Kevin Fiala had 1.04 points per game. Rope Hintz was 32nd with 1.03 points per game. I think his game just keeps getting better. And JT Miller was 35th in the NHL with 1.02 points per game. So these are guys that you may be able to pick up later because, again, There's so little to choose from unless you're talking about the top two. It's almost completely unpredictable after the top two. Pasternak, I think, probably ends up winning himself a Rocket Richard this year, but who knows, right? Can he hit 60 goals again? I absolutely think he can. And then there's the ultimate wild card in all of this, Connor Bedard. So Bedard's not top 20 on any of them, and I'm glad. But at the same time, Bedard could hit 70. It seems like all the predictions are 70 to 75 points with Bedard. But he could be better than that, too. Before Crosby came in, there was a lot of, well, you can't expect him to dominate right away. And he did. Connor McDavid, same thing. Well, you can't expect him to dominate right away. He did. It is possible. Bedard does. And so that could be a home run. That could be a player, too, that might be available a little bit later in fantasy drafts than you might expect. But I will be doing videos in the coming weeks on ones that I think are really blue chip, very, very predictable, that they're going to be guys you can count on, and then ones that are very highly volatile. So like a Nugent Hopkins, where what you're going to get from one year to the next could be different. Nugent Hopkins, very, very effective two-way forward. I don't think he hits 104 points again. I could see 80. But again, when you're talking about fantasy, that difference of 24 points, that could be huge. So there you go. Just a little bit of an overview, a little bit of an overlook at all of it. Which list do you think is most accurate for this coming season? Which one do you look at and say, really? Like the Hockey News doesn't have Tage Thompson in the top 20. How do you feel about that if you're a Sabres fan? And there's plenty of teams that don't show up in the top 20 at all. Detroit stands out as one that there's nobody on this board. It's wonderful, though, when you're looking at, doing previews, which I just finished yesterday, and you're talking about the upcoming season, because we have no idea. That story's yet to be written. It's always a lot of fun to look at. So let me know your thoughts in the comments section below, as always, and whether or not McDavid can hit 150 points again. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.